The alarm systems across Refuge Prime screamed into the night. Every Volari on the planet heard the sound they had hoped would never come. Enemy ships had arrived in their system, and there were dozens of them. The peaceful colonists looked up at their sky and saw death approaching from the stars. Elder Korath stood in the council chamber, his three-fingered hands trembling as he watched the orbital display. 47 Krell warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They were positioning themselves around his world like predators circling wounded prey. The Volari had no military. They had no weapons capable of reaching space. They had only their faith that the galaxy would protect them. "Send the distress signal," Korath said quietly. His voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. They had made a mistake. 6 months ago, the humans from Earth had offered them a mutual defense treaty. Korath had declined politely, believing the stories about human military might were exaggerated. The galactic community had assured him that peaceful species were protected by collective security agreements. No one would dare attack a colony world in this enlightened age. The Krell were proving that belief wrong. The communications officer sent the emergency broadcast on all standard frequencies. It was a simple message, transmitted in the common galactic language. Refuge Prime was under attack. They had no defenses. They were requesting immediate assistance from any nearby ships or military forces. The message repeated over and over, broadcasting into the void. No one answered. The first Krell bombardment began 3 hours after their arrival. Kinetic strikes hammered the northern continent, destroying what little industrial infrastructure the Volari had built. The planet shook with each impact. Fires bloomed across the landscape, visible from space. The Krell were not interested in occupation. They wanted the planet's resources, and the Volari were simply in the way. Korath ordered his people into the underground shelters that every colony maintained for emergencies. Thousands of Volari fled from the surface cities, carrying their children and whatever possessions they could grab. They moved through tunnels carved deep into the planetary bedrock, places where they might survive if the bombardment remained conventional. If the Krell used nuclear weapons or worse, even the shelters would not save them. The distress signal kept broadcasting. Still, no one came. 16 light-years away, Commander Jake Morrison sat in the command chair of the stealth reconnaissance ship Nightfall. His crew of 12 operated in silence, monitoring communications across this sector of space. They had been on patrol for 6 weeks, watching for threats that might emerge from the lawless regions beyond the galactic frontier. It was boring work most of the time. Today was different. "Commander, I'm picking up a distress signal," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from the communications station. She was young, only 26, but she had proven herself capable during her 2 years with the Shadow Fleet. "It's coming from Refuge Prime. They're reporting a Krell attack." Jake leaned forward, his jaw tightening. He knew about Refuge Prime. 6 months ago, he had been part of the diplomatic mission that offered the Volari an alliance. They had politely refused, and Jake had understood. Not every species wanted to associate with humanity's military reputation, but he also knew what Krell attacks looked like. They were brutal, efficient, and thorough. "How many Krell ships?" Jake asked. "The signal doesn't specify, but based on the transmission strength and panic in the message, I'd estimate at least 30 vessels. Probably more." Amy paused, listening to her equipment. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all standard channels. No one is responding to them." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. The galactic community liked to talk about collective security and mutual defense, but when actual violence occurred, nations tended to find reasons not to get involved. The Krell were dangerous. Fighting them meant accepting casualties. Most species decided it was easier to offer sympathies after the genocide was complete. "Get me the Shadow Fleet command frequency," Jake said. "Priority Alpha." Within minutes, he was connected to the encrypted network that linked every Shadow Fleet vessel in human space. The Shadow Fleet was Earth's response to a galaxy that respected strength more than diplomacy. These ships operated in silence, watching from the dark spaces between stars. They gathered intelligence, conducted reconnaissance, and when necessary, they struck before enemies knew they were there. Most species in the galaxy didn't even know the Shadow Fleet existed. That was exactly how Earth wanted it. "This is Morrison on Nightfall," Jake transmitted. "I have a developing situation at Refuge Prime. Krell invasion force estimated 40-plus vessels. The Valari are broadcasting distress with no response from galactic authorities, requesting permission to intervene. The response came back within 3 minutes. It was from Admiral Patricia Cole, the woman who commanded all Shadow Fleet operations. Her message was brief and clear. Permission granted. Rules of engagement: protect civilian population, eliminate hostile forces, maintain operational security as long as tactically viable. Additional assets are being deployed to your location. Show them why humans answer when others don't. Jake felt a grim smile cross his face. He switched to ship-wide communications. All hands battle stations. We're going to Refuge Prime. We're going to stop the Krell, and we're going to do it the way we always do, fast, quiet, and final. The Nightfall changed course, its experimental stealth systems making it invisible to conventional sensors. The ship's fusion drive left no heat signature. Its hull was coated in materials that absorbed scanner beams. Even its gravitational distortion was minimal, masked by sophisticated field generators. Jake's ship was designed to be a ghost, and it moved through space like one. But the Nightfall was not alone. Within the hour, 5 more Shadow Fleet vessels converged on Jake's position. They emerged from dark space like predators answering a hunter's call. Each ship was a masterpiece of stealth technology, crewed by men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous duty in Earth's military. They were the ones who operated in the shadows, who fought battles that would never be recorded in official histories, who protected people who would never know their names. Captain Lisa Bennett commanded the largest of the vessels, a Wraith-class ship called Phantom Echo. She was 42 years old, a veteran of 23 covert operations, and she had never lost a ship under her command. Her voice came over the tactical frequency, calm and professional. "Morrison, this is Bennett. We're with you. What's the plan?" Jake pulled up the tactical display, showing the current positions of the Krell fleet around Refuge Prime. The enemy ships were in a loose orbital formation, rotating to keep weapons platforms trained on the surface. They were arrogant in their positioning, confident that no one would challenge them. That arrogance was going to cost them. "We go in quiet," Jake said. "Deploy sensor drones to map their complete formation. I want to know every ship's position, every weapon system, every vulnerability. We hit their communications first, isolate them from each other. Then we start removing ships one at a time, making it look like technical failures. By the time they realize they're under attack, they'll be too fragmented to mount a coordinated response. And if they decide to glass the planet, ask Lieutenant Nina Ross from one of the other ships. She was an electronic warfare specialist, known for her ability to hack alien systems mid-combat. Then we drop stealth and engage directly," Jake said. "But let's make sure they don't get desperate enough to try it. We make this look like their equipment is failing. We make them think they're having a very bad day. Fear and confusion are weapons just like missiles." The Shadow Fleet accelerated toward Refuge Prime. They would arrive in 18 hours, moving at speeds that pushed the limits of their stealth systems. Every member of every crew knew what was waiting for them. The Krell were experienced warriors, brutal and efficient, but they had never faced an enemy they couldn't see. An enemy that struck from darkness and disappeared before retaliation was possible. On Refuge Prime, Elder Korath sat in the shelter's command center, watching his world burn through the sensor feeds. The bombardment had been continuing for hours. The Krell were methodical, destroying every structure on the surface, eliminating any capability the Valari might have had to resist or rebuild. His people huddled in the darkness below ground, holding their children, praying to whatever forces governed the universe that help would come. The distress signal kept broadcasting. The silence from the galaxy was deafening. Korath thought about the human commander who had visited 6 months ago. Morrison had been polite, even respectful. He had explained that Earth believed in building networks of mutual protection, that no species should face threats alone. Korath had declined because his people believed in the galactic community, in the systems and structures that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of violence. He had been wrong. The humans had been right. And now his people would pay the price for his mistake. But Korath didn't know that help was already coming. He didn't know that 6 ships were racing toward his world, moving through the darkness of space with lethal purpose. He didn't know that Commander Jake Morrison had already made the decision that would save his people. He didn't know. The Krell battlecruiser Dominant Fang held position in high orbit above Refuge Prime. Its commander, war leader Throck, watched the surface bombardment with satisfaction. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The Volari were helpless, their primitive shelters offering only temporary protection. Within another day, the bombardment would penetrate deep enough to crack open those underground refuges. Then the real cleansing would begin. Throck had commanded 17 successful planetary assaults. He knew how to break a species. First, you destroyed their infrastructure. Second, you eliminated their hope. Third, you gave them the choice between extinction and slavery. Most chose slavery. Either outcome served the Krell Empire's needs. "War leader," said his communications officer, "we're experiencing minor interference with the long-range communications array." Throck barely glanced at the report. "Repair it. The fleet needs to maintain contact with the homeworld." What Throck didn't know was that Lieutenant Nina Ross was already inside his ship's computer systems. She had been there for 20 minutes, having penetrated the Krell security through a maintenance port that the aliens believed was unhackable. Human cyber warfare had evolved beyond anything the galaxy had encountered. Nina moved through the dominant Fang's networks like smoke, copying data, mapping systems, and planting programs that would activate when she gave the command. "I'm in their primary systems," Nina reported over the encrypted Shadow Fleet channel. "Give me another 10 minutes and I can shut down their weapons grid without them knowing why." "Copy that," Jake Morrison responded from the Nightfall. His ship was positioned 40,000 kilometers from the Krell formation, completely invisible to their sensors. 5 other Shadow Fleet vessels held similar positions, surrounding the enemy fleet in a sphere of silent threats. "Bennett, what's your status?" Captain Lisa Bennett sat in the command chair of the Phantom Echo, studying the tactical display with the intensity of a chess master. Her ship was the largest in the Shadow Fleet, equipped with weapon systems that could crack a battleship in half. But firepower meant nothing if you weren't smart about using it. "I have firing solutions on their command vessel and 3 heavy cruisers," Lisa said, "but I recommend we stick with the sabotage approach. The longer they think this is technical failure, the more confused and vulnerable they become." "Agreed," Jake said. "Ross, disable their communications. Make it look like a cascade failure in their network hub. Carter, are you ready for your run?" Lieutenant Amy Carter sat in her strike fighter, a sleek craft barely larger than a civilian shuttle but packed with enough firepower to destroy a corvette. She was docked in the Nightfall's small hangar bay, running final checks on her systems. This was the part of the mission she had been training for: insertion behind enemy lines while everyone was looking the wrong way. "Ready, Commander," Amy said. Her heart was racing, but her hands were steady. Fear was something you acknowledged and then set aside. That was what the instructors at Shadow Fleet Academy had taught her. Fear kept you alert. Panic killed you. "Launch when ready," Jake ordered. "Get those civilians to safety." Amy's fighter dropped from the Nightfall's hangar and accelerated toward Refuge Prime. Her approach vector kept her in the sensor shadow of the Krell fleet, using their own ships to mask her presence. The strike fighter was designed for exactly this kind of infiltration. It was small, fast, and nearly invisible. Within minutes, she was burning through the atmosphere, heading for the coordinates where the Volari refugees were hiding. On the surface, Sergeant Kyle Brooks and his 12-person Marine team were already on the ground. They had dropped 30 minutes earlier using insertion pods that looked like meteors on sensors. The pods had burned up in the atmosphere, leaving no evidence of their arrival. Kyle and his team had gathered their equipment from the scattered drop containers and begun moving toward the nearest Volari shelter. Kyle was 34 years old, built like a concrete block, and had spent 12 years in Earth's military. He had seen combat on 6 different worlds. None of those experiences compared to what the Shadow Fleet asked of its Marines. They operated alone, deep behind enemy lines with no support except what they brought with them. They were expected to complete impossible missions and disappear before anyone knew they had been there. "I've got the shelter entrance," said Corporal Danny Price, one of Kyle's team members. He was crouched behind a ruined building, scanning the area with thermal sensors. No Krell ground forces in the immediate area. "They're staying in orbit for now." "Good," Kyle said. "Ross, can you tap into the shelter's communications?" Nina's voice came back immediately. "Already done. Patching you through now." Kyle activated his translator and spoke into his helmet mic. "This is Sergeant Kyle Brooks of Earth's military forces. We're here to help evacuate civilians to safer locations. Is anyone receiving this message?" "Inside the shelter," Elder Korath nearly fell out of his chair when the voice came through the emergency communication system. It was speaking Valari, but the accent was clearly alien. The voice was calm, professional, and impossibly welcome. "This is Elder Korath," he said quickly. "We receive you. Who are you? How many ships do you have?" "We're from Earth," Kyle said. "And we have enough ships to handle the situation. Right now, my priority is getting your people to reinforced locations where the bombardment can't reach you. We've identified 3 deep cave systems within 10 kilometers of your position. My team will guide your people there." Korath felt something he hadn't experienced in hours. Hope. "The humans came," he said quietly to the other council members around him. "After we refused their alliance, after we dismissed their offer, they came anyway." Within the hour, Kyle and his Marines were inside the shelter, organizing the evacuation. The Valari were surprised by the humans. They were shorter than expected, stocky and heavily muscled, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light. They moved with efficiency and purpose, but there was also kindness in how they treated the frightened civilians. One Marine, a woman named Corporal Susan Wells, spent 10 minutes calming a group of terrified Valari children, showing them pictures of her own family back on Earth. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," Susan told them through the translator. "I promise." Above the planet, the Krell were beginning to realize something was wrong. 3 ships had reported communications failures. 2 more had experienced unexplained power fluctuations. The dominant Fang's weapon systems had gone offline for 17 minutes before engineering teams managed to restore them. War Leader Throck was not a superstitious being, but even he was beginning to feel uneasy. "Status report," Throck demanded. "What is causing these malfunctions?" His chief engineer was a veteran of 40 years' service. He studied the diagnostic reports with growing confusion. "War Leader, the failures appear to be random. Different systems, different ships, no common factor. It's as if," he hesitated. "As if what?" Throck snapped. "As if someone is sabotaging us, one ship at a time. But that's impossible. We would detect enemy vessels." Throck stared at the engineering report. The engineer was right, it was impossible. And yet the evidence suggested exactly that. Someone was in his fleet, moving unseen, causing havoc with surgical precision. It was a disturbing thought. "Increase sensor sweeps," Throck ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. If there are enemy ships in this system, I want them found." The Krell sensor technicians expanded their search parameters, pushing their equipment to maximum sensitivity. They found nothing. The Shadow Fleet ships remained ghosts, their stealth systems more advanced than anything the Krell could detect. But Jake Morrison knew the increased scanning meant the enemy was getting nervous. That was good. Nervous opponents made mistakes. "All units, prepare for Phase 2, Jake transmitted. "Bennett, you're up. Make it count." Lisa Bennett had been waiting for this moment. Her targeting computer had been tracking the Krell battlecruiser Savage Blade for the past hour, calculating firing solutions, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The Savage Blade had separated slightly from the main formation, moving to cover a different orbital position. It was isolated, vulnerable, and about to learn what happens when humans decide to stop being subtle. "Firing," Lisa said calmly. The Phantom Echo's main railgun fired a single tungsten penetrator at 17,000 meters per second. The projectile was invisible to sensors, simply too small and too fast to track. It hit the Savage Blade's reactor section with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The battlecruiser's power core went critical instantly. There was a flash of light, and then the massive warship came apart in a silent explosion that lit up the orbital space. The other Krell ships reacted with shock and confusion. Their sensors showed no incoming weapons fire, no enemy ships, nothing that could have caused the destruction. To them, the Savage Blade had simply exploded. Reactor failure, a catastrophic malfunction. It happened sometimes, even with the best engineering, but War Leader Throck wasn't convinced. "That was not a malfunction," he said quietly. "Someone is hunting us," he was right. Over the next 2 hours, 3 more Krell ships suffered critical failures. One lost all power and began drifting out of orbit. Another experienced a cascade failure in its life support systems. A third simply... War Leader Throck stood before the holographic display in his command chamber, studying what remained of his fleet. In the past 6 hours, he had lost 4 ships and had another 3 reporting critical systems failures. His communications network was fragmenting. His sensor grids were giving contradictory readings. Something was systematically dismantling his invasion force, and he still couldn't see what it was. "Prepare the mass bombardment weapons," Throck ordered. His officers looked at him with surprise. Those weapons were forbidden by galactic law. They were designed to crack planetary crusts, to make worlds uninhabitable. Using them would mark the Krell as war criminals, subject to sanctions and possible military intervention from the galactic community. But Throck was beyond caring about galactic law. He was fighting an invisible enemy, and he knew only one way to win such a fight: destroy everything. Leave nothing standing. If the enemy was hiding on the planet, he would eliminate the planet as a viable hiding place. War Leader, his second-in-command, said carefully, "The Galactic Council will respond to such an action. We could face consequences." "The Galactic Council takes months to make decisions," Throck growled. "By then this planet will be ash and we'll be gone. Charge the weapons. Target the tectonic fault lines. We'll crack this world in half." Deep in the planet's cave systems, Elder Korath was organizing the latest group of refugees when his communicator beeped. It was Kyle Brooks, and the human's voice was urgent. "Elder, we're picking up energy signatures from the Krell fleet. They're charging weapons that match the profile of planetary destruction devices. They're going to try to destroy your entire world." Korath felt his blood turn cold. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 40 minutes before the weapons reach full charge," Kyle said. "But here's what you need to know. We're not going to let that happen. My commanders are about to stop being quiet. Things are going to get loud up there. Keep your people underground and calm. This will be over soon." In orbit, Jake Morrison received the same intelligence reports that Kyle had just shared. The Krell were preparing to commit genocide. That changed everything. The Shadow Fleet had been conducting a stealth operation, dismantling the enemy quietly. But you didn't respond to attempted genocide quietly. You responded with overwhelming force. "All Shadow Fleet vessels, this is Morrison," Jake transmitted. "The enemy has escalated to weapons of mass destruction. We're dropping stealth protocols. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free. Show these murderers what happens when you threaten innocent lives." 6 Shadow Fleet ships deactivated their stealth systems simultaneously. To the Krell sensors, it appeared that 6 warships had just materialized from nothing, surrounding their fleet in perfect tactical positions. The enemy had been there all along, invisible and patient. Now they were visible, and they were done being patient. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the Earth Shadow Fleet." Jake broadcast on all Krell frequencies, speaking in their language. "You have 1 hour to power down those weapons and leave this system. This is your only warning. Comply or be destroyed." On the dominant Fang, War Leader Throck stared at the sudden appearance of human ships with disbelief that quickly turned to rage. These were the ghosts that had been haunting his fleet. These humans had been picking his ships apart one by one, making him look incompetent, making his warriors look weak. Now they dared to issue demands. "Humans," Throck said with contempt. "I have 43 warships. You have 6. Your mathematics are poor." "Our math is just fine," Jake said calmly. "You have 43 targets. We have 43 solutions. You have 1 hour. Use it to leave." Throck killed the communication channel and turned to his weapons officer. "All ships combat formation. Destroy those human vessels. Show them what happens when primitive species challenge the Krell Empire." The Krell fleet began to move, restructuring from a bombardment formation to a battle formation. War Leader Throck had commanded many battles. He was confident in his warriors, confident in his ships. He had 43 vessels against 6. The humans had made a fatal error in revealing themselves. Lisa Bennett watched the Krell fleet reorganize on her tactical display and smiled without humor. "They're actually going to fight us. Morrison, I think we hurt their feelings." "Let's hurt more than their feelings," Jake said. "All ships engage at will. Priority targets are the vessels charging planet-killer weapons. After that, anything that shoots at us dies." The battle began with sudden, terrible violence. The Shadow Fleet ships were outnumbered 7-1. But numbers meant nothing when technology and training were so dramatically different. These weren't conventional warships. These were human stealth vessels, designed from the beginning to fight enemies with superior numbers. Every system, every weapon, every tactical protocol had been built around a simple philosophy: strike first, strike hard, and be somewhere else before the enemy can respond. The Phantom Echo fired its main guns, sending depleted uranium rounds toward 3 different Krell ships simultaneously. The railgun projectiles crossed the distance in seconds, punching through shields and armor like they were paper. 2 Krell cruisers exploded immediately. The third lost its entire forward section and began tumbling through space, venting atmosphere and bodies. Lieutenant Nina Ross, operating from one of the smaller Shadow Fleet ships, launched her electronic warfare attack. She had spent hours mapping the Krell fleet's computer networks, identifying vulnerabilities, preparing intrusion pathways. Now she executed those attacks with surgical precision. 12 Krell ships suddenly lost control of their weapon systems. Their targeting computers locked up. Their missiles failed to launch. Their energy weapons powered down unexpectedly. The Krell crews frantically tried to regain control, but Nina was faster, smarter, and operating from inside their own systems. Amy Carter had launched from the planet's surface in her strike fighter, climbing to orbital altitude. She was one small ship against a fleet of battleships, but her fighter was loaded with weapons designed specifically for this kind of asymmetric warfare. She targeted a Krell destroyer that was charging its planet-killer weapon, launching a spread of plasma torpedoes. The torpedoes were smart weapons, capable of adjusting their flight paths mid-journey. 3 of them hit the destroyer's reactor core. The ship came apart in a brilliant explosion that temporarily blinded nearby Krell sensors. The Krell fleet tried to respond, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to stay in one place. The Shadow Fleet ships moved with impossible agility, their engines more powerful than anything the Krell had encountered. They would appear, fire, and disappear behind debris or into the sensor shadows of destroyed ships. The Krell weapons tracked targets that were no longer there, firing at ghost images while the real threats circled and struck again. War Leader Throck watched his fleet being torn apart with growing horror. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. His ships were dying faster than his tactical officers could track. In less than 8 minutes, he had lost 14 vessels, 14 against 6 enemy ships. It was impossible, and yet it was happening before his eyes. "Retreat," Throck ordered. "All ships, emergency jump protocols. We're leaving this system." But Nina Ross had anticipated this order. She had planted programs deep in the Krell fleet's faster-than-light navigation systems. When the Krell ships tried to engage their jump drives, half of them failed completely. The other half experienced navigation errors that would send them wildly off course. The Krell were trapped, unable to run, unable to fight effectively, watching their fleet dissolve around them. "Morrison, I'm detecting 2 Krell ships still attempting to fire their planet-killer weapons," Lisa reported. "They're desperate. They might try to launch even if it means destroying their own ships in the process." "Negative," Jake said coldly. "They don't get that option. All ships concentrate fire on those 2 vessels. I want them gone." 6 Shadow Fleet ships turned their weapons on the 2 Krell battleships that were still trying to murder an entire world. The amount of firepower that hit those 2 ships in the next 30 seconds was staggering. Railgun rounds, plasma torpedoes, directed energy weapons, and kinetic missiles all converged on 2 targets simultaneously. The Krell battleship's shields held for approximately 3 seconds before collapsing. The armor held for another 2 seconds. Then both ships simply ceased to exist, vaporized by weapons that had been designed to crack fortress stations. On the surface, in the deep caves, the Volari civilians felt the vibrations through the ground. The orbital battle was causing atmospheric disturbances, creating shockwaves that penetrated even into their deep shelters. Elder Korath stood with Kyle Brooks watching a portable tactical display that showed the battle in orbit. "Your people fight like nothing I've ever seen," Korath said quietly. "The Krell are considered one of the most dangerous military species in the galaxy. Yet your 6 ships are destroying 40 of theirs." Kyle watched the display with professional detachment. He had seen Shadow Fleet operations before. This was what humans did when you pushed them too far. "We don't like fighting," Kyle said. "But when we do fight, we fight to win. The Krell threatened to destroy your entire world. That's not war. That's murder. We don't tolerate murder." The debris field around Refuge Prime told a story of devastation. 33 Krell warships had been destroyed completely. Their wreckage tumbled through orbit, a permanent reminder of what happened when predators encountered something more dangerous than themselves. The 10 surviving Krell vessels had jumped away hours ago, limping back toward their empire with tales that no one would quite believe. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Nightfall, reviewing the battle reports. His small fleet had achieved something remarkable. 6 ships against 43, and they had won without losing a single vessel. 2 Shadow Fleet ships had sustained minor damage, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Not one human casualty. It was exactly the kind of operation the Shadow Fleet was designed to execute. But Jake knew the hard part was just beginning. They had saved the Volari, but they had also violated about 17 different galactic laws in the process. They had conducted military operations without Galactic Council authorization. They had engaged in combat in a star system that wasn't under Earth's official jurisdiction. They had used military force to interfere with what the Council might technically consider an internal matter between the Krell Empire and an unaligned colony world. "Commander, we're receiving priority transmissions from Earth Command," said Lieutenant Amy Carter. She had returned from her strike fighter operations and resumed her position at the communication station. "Admiral Cole wants a full report. Also, the Galactic Council is demanding an immediate explanation for our actions." Jake smiled without humor. "Tell the Admiral we'll have a report within the hour. Tell the Galactic Council they can wait. We're a bit busy helping refugees right now." On the surface, Sergeant Kyle Brooks and his Marines were coordinating with the Volari to assess damage and organize reconstruction efforts. The bombardment had destroyed most of the surface infrastructure, but the deep shelters had protected the vast majority of the population. Elder Korath estimated they had saved 97% of his people. In any other scenario, losing 3% of a population would be a tragedy. After facing total extinction, it felt like a miracle. "We'll need to establish temporary housing," Kyle told Korath as they walked through one of the destroyed cities. "My engineering team can help set up prefab structures. They're not pretty, but they're weatherproof and can be deployed in hours. Within a few weeks, you should have enough shelter for everyone." Korath looked at the human sergeant with gratitude. "You've already done so much. We cannot ask for more." "You're not asking," Kyle said. "We're offering. Besides, it's what we do. Shadow Fleet doesn't just fight battles. We help people rebuild after the fighting is done. It's the other half of the job." A young Volari female approached them hesitantly. She was carrying a small child, and both looked exhausted but alive. "You're the humans," she said in halting common galactic language. "You saved us," Kyle nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We did what we could. Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk your lives for strangers?" Kyle looked at her, at the child she was holding, and felt something tighten in his chest. He had a daughter back on Earth, not much older than the Volari child. He had joined the Shadow Fleet because he believed someone needed to stand between innocents and the predators who would harm them. Questions like this reminded him why that belief mattered. "Because someone has to," Kyle said simply, "and we decided it would be us." The Volari female's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward and did something unexpected. She handed her child to one of Kyle's Marines, Corporal Susan Wells, and then embraced Kyle in the traditional Volari gesture of profound gratitude. It was an honor rarely given to outsiders, a physical expression of debt that could never be fully repaid. Kyle accepted the embrace awkwardly. He wasn't good at emotional moments, but he understood what it meant to this woman and her people. They had been abandoned by the galaxy, written off as acceptable casualties in someone else's political calculations. Humanity had refused to accept that calculation. Sometimes the most powerful statement you could make was simply showing up when everyone else looked away. In orbit, Captain Lisa Bennett was conducting her own assessment. The Phantom Echo had taken some damage during the battle. Nothing critical, but enough that they would need to put in at a repair facility eventually. She stood in her ship's engineering bay, reviewing the damage reports with her chief engineer, Lieutenant Kevin Hayes. "We lost 2 of the forward shield generators," Kevin reported. "The main railgun is still operational, but we're down to 60% ammunition. And we've got some concerning stress fractures in the primary hull structure. Nothing that will compromise us in the short term, but it needs attention." "How long for repairs if we use our own resources?" Lisa asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3, Kevin said. "But we'd need to find a quiet location to do the work. Can't exactly conduct major repairs while maintaining operational security." Lisa nodded. Operational security was always a concern for Shadow Fleet vessels. They operated in secrecy, and that secrecy was both their greatest strength and their greatest limitation. You couldn't pull into a public shipyard without answering questions about what you were and where you came from. Shadow Fleet ships usually conducted repairs at hidden facilities scattered throughout human space, places that officially didn't exist. "We'll figure it out," Lisa said. For now, we maintain position. We're not leaving until we're sure the Volari are secure. She returned to the bridge and opened a private channel to Jake Morrison. We need to talk about the Galactic Council situation. They're not going to let this go. We just humiliated one of the major military powers by destroying their fleet with minimal forces. That's going to create ripples. Jake had been thinking about the same issue. I know. Earth Command is already preparing a statement. The official position is going to be that we responded to a distress call, that we acted in defense of a civilian population facing genocide, and that we would do it again under the same circumstances. That's not going to satisfy the Council, Lisa pointed out. They'll say we should have waited for official authorization. They'll argue that we violated sovereignty laws. Then they can argue, Jake said. I'm done pretending that bureaucratic procedures matter more than lives. The Volari sent out a distress signal. They broadcasted it for hours. No one responded except us. If the Council wants to complain about our methods, they should have been here doing the job themselves. Within hours, the political response began. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Earth's representative, Ambassador Daniel Foster, found himself facing hostile questioning from multiple council members. The Krell Empire's representative was particularly vocal, demanding sanctions against Earth for what they called unprovoked military aggression. Daniel Foster was 60 years old, a career diplomat who had spent 30 years navigating galactic politics. He was calm, professional, and completely unintimidated by the Council's posturing. He stood at the central podium, surrounded by holographic representations of hundreds of species, and delivered Earth's response. The Krell representative speaks of unprovoked aggression, Daniel said. Let's examine what actually happened. The Krell Empire sent 43 warships to attack a peaceful colony world. They conducted orbital bombardment against civilian targets. They prepared to deploy weapons of mass destruction that would have rendered an entire planet uninhabitable. And they did all of this against a species that had no military, no defenses, and no ability to resist. The council chamber erupted in crosstalk. The Krell representative tried to interrupt, but Daniel raised his hand. I'm not finished. The Volari sent distress calls on all standard frequencies. They begged for help from this council, from any nearby ships, from anyone who might intervene. Those calls went unanswered for hours. This council, which claims to protect peaceful species, did nothing while genocide was being prepared. The proper procedure would have been to bring the matter before this council, said the Horthian representative. A species known for strict adherence to bureaucratic protocols, Earth acted without authorization. Daniel looked at the Horthian with something approaching contempt. How long would council authorization have taken? How many meetings would have been needed? How many votes in subcommittees and procedural debates? Let me answer that for you. By the time this council would have authorized action, the Volari would have been extinct. But I suppose that would have been acceptable, as long as proper procedures were followed. The chamber fell silent. Daniel's words had cut through the political rhetoric and exposed the ugly truth. The Galactic Council cared more about process than results, more about jurisdiction than justice. They would have let the Volari die rather than risk political complications by acting quickly. Earth's position is simple, Daniel continued. When we receive a distress call from people facing genocide, we respond. We don't wait for permission. We don't debate jurisdiction, we act. If this council wants to sanction us for saving lives, then impose your sanctions. Earth will continue to do what we believe is right, regardless of political consequences. Back at Refuge Prime, Jake Morrison received a summary of the council. 3 weeks after the battle, Refuge Prime was beginning to show signs of recovery. The temporary shelters had been replaced with more permanent structures. The Volari had cleared debris from their cities and begun rebuilding the infrastructure that the Krell bombardment had destroyed. Human engineering teams worked alongside Volari construction crews, sharing knowledge and techniques. What had started as a rescue mission had become something deeper, a genuine partnership between two species learning to trust each other. Commander Jake Morrison stood in what would eventually become the new council chambers of Refuge Prime. Right now, it was just a cleared space with foundation markers, but Elder Korath had insisted that Jake see it. The Elder wanted the human commander to understand what his actions had made possible. Before you came, we believed the galactic community would protect us, Korath said as they walked the perimeter of the construction site. We thought that civilization meant safety, that established systems would defend the weak. You showed us the truth. Civilization is only as strong as the people willing to defend it. Jake nodded slowly. He had seen this pattern before. Species who believed in abstract systems, who trusted that justice would somehow emerge from bureaucratic processes, who learned too late that predators don't care about rules. The galaxy has a lot of pretty words about cooperation and mutual defense, Jake said. But words don't stop kinetic bombardments. Action stops them, which is why the Valari Council has voted unanimously, Korath said. We wish to formally request membership in Earth's Mutual Defense Network. We want to be part of what you're building. Jake had been expecting this. Earth's diplomatic corps had been preparing the necessary agreements for days. But hearing it directly from Korath made it real. The Valari weren't joining because they were being pressured, or because they saw political advantage. They were joining because they believed in what humanity stood for. We'd be honored to have you, Jake said. But you should know what that means. It means if someone threatens Earth or our allies, the Valari might be asked to help. It means you'll need to develop defensive capabilities. It means becoming part of a galaxy that isn't always peaceful. We understand, Korath said, but we also understand that peace without the ability to defend it is just a temporary condition. We were peaceful before the Krell came. That peace meant nothing when the ships arrived. Now we will be peaceful and protected. That's a better combination. Back on Earth, in the headquarters of the Shadow Fleet Command, Admiral Patricia Cole was dealing with a very different kind of challenge. The Galactic Council had filed formal complaints about Earth's military actions. 17 species had signed a petition demanding that humanity be sanctioned for unauthorized military intervention. The IR political pressure was significant, but Admiral Cole had been in military command for 30 years. She understood politics, but she also understood something more important: leverage. Earth had demonstrated military capability that exceeded most species' estimates. More importantly, they had demonstrated willingness to use that capability in defense of others. That made Earth valuable in a way that political gestures never could. The Council wants sanctions, Admiral Cole said to her staff during a morning briefing. What they're going to get is a choice. They can sanction us and prove they value procedure over protection, or they can acknowledge that we did what needed to be done. Either way, Earth isn't going to apologize for saving lives. Commander Lisa Bennett attended the briefing via holographic link from the Phantom Echo. Her ship was still in orbit around Refuge Prime, conducting final security sweeps. Admiral, we're receiving inquiries from 11 different species about defense agreements. Most of them are smaller nations that the Council has historically ignored. They're scared and they see us as a potential protector. Admiral Cole smiled. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. Approve preliminary discussions with all of them. Have diplomatic teams draw up framework agreements. I want it clear that Earth's protection comes with expectations. We defend those who defend themselves. We help species that are willing to invest in their own security. We're not hiring out as mercenaries, and we're not providing charity. We're building a coalition of species that believe in mutual defense. The strategy was elegant. Earth wasn't trying to conquer anyone or impose their will through force. They were offering partnership to species that shared their values. The Galactic Council could complain all they wanted, but if dozens of species voluntarily aligned with Earth, that shifted the entire political landscape. On Refuge Prime, Sergeant Kyle Brooks was saying goodbye to the Valari families his team had helped evacuate. It was harder than he expected. Over the past 3 weeks, he had gotten to know these people. He had shared meals with them, learned their customs, helped their children through nightmares about the bombardment. They had become real to him in a way that most mission objectives never did. The young Valari female who had embraced him weeks ago approached with her child. Through a translator, she said, "My daughter's name is Kyla. I named her after you. She will grow up knowing that a human saved her life, that when our world needed help, your people came. She will tell her children, and they will tell theirs. Your name will be remembered by my family for generations." Kyle felt his throat tighten. He wasn't good with emotional moments, but this one hit him harder than he expected. "Thank you," he managed. "I hope she has a good life. I hope she grows up in a galaxy that's safer than the one she was born into. If humans have anything to say about it." "She will," the Valari woman said with certainty. Kyle returned to the Nightfall with his team. As the ship prepared to leave orbit, he stood at the observation window watching Refuge Prime fall away beneath them. Corporal Susan Wells joined him. looking at the planet with similar mixed feelings. "You think we made a difference, Sergeant?" Susan asked. "I know we did," Kyle said. "Every person down there is alive because we showed up. Every child that gets to grow up, every family that gets to stay together. That's because we decided distress calls matter. Yeah, we made a difference." The Nightfall broke orbit and began its journey back to Earth. But 3 other Shadow Fleet vessels remained behind, rotating through patrols around Refuge Prime. The planet was under Earth's protection now, and that protection meant constant vigilance. The Krell might try again. Pirates might see the wounded colony as an easy target. Earth wasn't going to let that happen. 2 months after the battle, the Galactic Council held a special session to address the Refuge Prime situation. Earth's ambassador Daniel Foster stood before the assembled representatives, but this time he wasn't alone. Elder Korath stood beside him, along with representatives from 3 other species that had formed defense agreements with Earth in the weeks following the battle. The Horthian representative, still pushing for sanctions against Earth, spoke first. "This council cannot allow individual species to conduct military operations without authorization. The precedent is dangerous. Today it's Earth defending the Valari. Tomorrow it could be any species attacking any target and claiming humanitarian justification." Daniel Foster let Korath respond. The Valari elder stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the council chamber with unexpected strength. "I speak as the elected, leader of Refuge Prime. I speak for the 97% of my population that survived because Earth responded to our distress call. When the Krell came to destroy us, we appealed to this council. We sent emergency transmissions on all standard frequencies. We begged for help. This council did nothing. You debated jurisdiction while our cities burned. You discussed proper procedure while our children hid in underground shelters waiting to die." The chamber fell silent. Korath continued, his words measured but forceful. "Earth didn't wait for your authorization because there was no time to wait. They saw people in danger and they acted. They risked their ships and their lives for strangers who had rejected their friendship months before. They asked for nothing in return. They simply did what they believed was right. If this council wants to sanction Earth for that, then you reveal your true nature. You care more about political control than about protecting innocent lives." Daniel Foster watched the council representatives process Korath's words. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked openly supportive. The political calculation was changing. Earth wasn't some rogue power acting unilaterally. They were responding to desperate calls for help that the council had ignored. That narrative was harder to fight. "Earth's position remains unchanged," Daniel said. "We will respond to distress calls from species facing existential threats. We will not wait for authorization when lives are at stake. We will continue to build partnerships with species that share our commitment to mutual defense. The council can accept this reality and work with us, or they can oppose it and become irrelevant. The choice is yours." It took another month of debate, but the council eventually reached a compromise. They couldn't officially endorse Earth's actions without undermining their own authority, but they also couldn't sanction Earth without alienating the growing number of species that supported humanity's approach. The final resolution was carefully worded. It